Welcome and thank you for joining us in this breakout session from the 2021 Parliament of World Religions. Breakout is actually a good word when you're speaking about refugees and refugee camps. Breaking out is somehow important to them. My name's David Aliff. In August last year, with a couple of dear friends of mine, who two of them are with me today, we started Humanity in Need, Rainbow Refugees, to help people in great need in Kakuma and in Nairobi in Kenya. The reason we started it was because generally people of faith don't get involved, which is really sad. The great man Archbishop Desmond Tutu has said that he would rather go to hell than a homophobic heaven. Count us in. LGBTIQ refugees in Kakuma camp describe Kakuma as a living homophobic hell. A young lesbian woman spoke to us just this week, about to give birth to a baby fathered by one of three men who violently raped her as she walked back with a friend from the clinic where she was being treated for malaria. When she discovered she was pregnant, it was too late for her to do anything other than bear her child. Now she wants to be a good, loving mother, but the pain of her pregnancy and the knowledge of an unknown rapist father is a trauma she has to live with. She was raped because she is a lesbian. Is this a safe place for her and her child? I don't think so. Just last night, our Facebook feeds was filled with the tragic death of a young man, Karim, a happy young man who you'll see in this photograph that is being shown to you. He was poisoned, and there is a suspicion of suicide, but we can't be sure of that because there are other cases where people have been poisoned by family and others. The reason? Because the person is gay, lesbian, or transgender. Preachers who preach judgment on LGBTIQ people have blood on their hands. So too do those who listen to them. Now, this young man didn't make it to Kakuma camp. He didn't make it to a life after the suffering. We hope many of them will. So we're going to dedicate this session today to him and also to all those other people who are suffering in this terrible way. In this session, we invite you to join us as pilgrims to another world, trying to walk where others' feet tread. Friends, I want you to please imagine yourself not as you are, but as a trans woman from Uganda, with all the issues that life has given you through your childhood. Imagine the moment you were discovered by your parents in your teens, the anger, the rage, the fear, and the shouting, voices and tears. They loved you once, but suddenly you were no longer their child, but an object of demon possession and shame. We skip over the beatings from your friends and neighbours, the shouted exorcisms from the once gentle pastor who had loved your singing and music leading, and then how you escaped bruised and battered to walk many miles and ride on the back of trucks, avoiding the gaze of angry eyes and the battle to cross the border. Arriving in Kakuma camp in a desert wasteland, you find yourself in a hostile, treeless landscape of huts and roofs and around 160,000 refugees from different tribes. Soon, you find that being LGBTIQ, you are the most hated minority there, and being trans, you are the most obvious. The UNHCR is committed to equality and to protect you, but too many die. Too many are beaten within an inch of their lives. Too many are denied medical care, food and water, all because of who they love and who they are. Now imagine the memory of those hate-filled words from your mother and father and friends, and those beatings that you relive every day as you try to sleep in the awful heat or cold of the desert. If only your family hadn't once loved you. With the exercise of imagination, I invite you to continue through this presentation, to continually ask yourself the question, how would I survive this. Through COVID-19, enormous strains upon the UNHCR provision of food for such a large number of people has become sporadic. You have to become a beggar to survive, competing with other hungry mouths and depending on the generosity of others from faraway places. Throughout this vast desert camp, there are public latrines and public water standpipes where you have to queue to perform your ablutions and get life-giving water. It is at these places where you face the greatest risk. Recognized for who you are beaten often, trodden down by other refugees who hate you because you are so different. If you are unlucky enough to be arrested by the police for some simple misdemeanor, you will be stripped and beaten, and in the cells, your private parts will be exposed and mocked by officers and prisoners alike. And worse may come. You will fear all of this because you know of people who have not survived the abuse. If you are very lucky, someone will provide the bond to set you free. If you're not, you will definitely perish there. Strangely, through it all, you may still retain faith in the merciful God of your parents. And so you pray that one day in your life, you may experience the 4 good friends of peace: justice, truth, and mercy. My friends, Kath and Brian, will talk to you about those 4 friends. We've got some good stories to celebrate. Over 18 months, we've had some successes: a food program to feed up to 90 people a day, the building of a secure compound in corrugated iron, giving protection to many queer folk from the attacks of other refugees, clean water taps within the compound and toilets too, and other things as well, like medical expenses and so on, for typhoid, malaria, and surgeries following attacks. In this work, we have been joined, and we have joined with many around the world who have been assisting these people for years. In fact, in many ways, we are latecomers. 2 quick stories. Earlier this year, a young gay man in his early 20s, Trinidad, a poet, was killed when the compound in which he lived was firebombed by unknown assailants. He suffered burns to 80% of his body, and because of delays in getting him to treatment in faraway Nairobi, he died in hospital there. We could do nothing but grieve with our friends in Africa. What had Trinidad done wrong? A 9-year-old boy, the second story, was chased from his family and home in Kampala when his stepfather discovered he was conceived by a high school gay boy wrestling with his sexuality. The stepfather's love for his adopted son turned to hate for the child. Innocent of the conditions of his birth, yet obviously filled with the demons of his gay father. We helped the birth father arrange the escape of the boy to live with him in Nairobi as he awaited relocation to a safe and welcoming country. Let me ask you, what had the little boy done wrong? Organisations generally don't like working with refugees. They carry so much trauma. Add to that the rejection that follows LGBTIQ people everywhere. Then there is the question of corruption. Money is misused, yet it has happened to us. Every charity faces that problem, and overseas aid organisations specifically. The fact that the challenge is difficult shouldn't stop us. Can we condemn those who fail us? Holocaust survivor and eminent psychologist and author, the late Viktor Frankl, said it best: no man should judge unless he asks himself in absolute honesty whether in a similar situation he might not have done the same. And so, if we care, love must find a way. Let me introduce 2 of my good friends on the board of Humanity in Need. Dr. Kath Connolly, you'll see on the screen, teaches and plays harp beautifully, we say, and so do many others. She obtained her doctorate through the work she undertook on a major study of hope and published Handbook of Hope, Emerging Stories Beyond a Disintegrating World. You'll hear more about that soon She is a spiritual director, co-leader of Melbourne's Living Well Centre, and has led many pilgrimages in Ireland and on the Camino to Spain. As a board member, she heads our work with Women of Steel in Kakuma. She is actually quite a nice person, really. Brian Coogan, not a doctor, he says, but says he has been certified as a pun master. We can't forgive him for that. Leader and trainer in the LGBTIQ Christian community, has networked with pastors and church leaders to be more affirming of LGBTIQ people. A businessman and an IT entrepreneur, Brian has many skills that he willingly shares with others. Not working on a book, and says he would rather die than do so. He's a board member of Humanity in Need. He generously works with refugees to empower them through and past the torment they suffer. Dr. Kath, over to you.
Thanks so much, David. For the next bit, we really want to focus on what it has been like when we had this awful discovery that some of our donations had been misappropriated. This could have torn our whole board apart. It could have meant like we don't want to exist anymore. And yet we delved right into it to see where it would take us. And to do this, I really want to frame this around the work of John Paul Lederach. So Lederach is a Mennonite Christian, an American professor of international peace building, and he's written widely on conflict resolution and mediation. In his book, The Journey Towards Reconciliation, he has landed on the most inspirational and useful way to provide an entry point into the things that we have experienced since our discovery of the misappropriation of funds in our Kakuma work. Quoting from Psalm 85 from the Hebrew Scriptures, he says, "Mercy and truth have met together, justice and peace have kissed." Lederach unpacks the unique insight that the perspectives of truth, mercy, justice and peace bring to any situation of conflict. He says that reconciliation will only happen when you have the dance of these four principles together. We would like to use Lederach's model as a way to bring to you our work in engaging with our Kakuma sisters and brothers, as we find a way to move forward. Lederach has this as a most concrete concept. He actually personifies these four things: truth, justice, mercy, peace, and he has them meet as characters, trying to bring their different perspectives to a situation that needs reconciliation. We are using this same interplay to explain our unpacking of our Kakuma work, especially when we found out about the misappropriation of funds. So as we work our way through these four different principles, I'd like to hand over to Brian Coogan, who is going to talk about the first of these aspects, that of truth.
Hi, it's Brian here. Wanting to talk to you a bit about the Kakuma camp. Next slide. Violence is never far away. Lots of reports of people being poisoned and burnt and so on reach UNHCR. That's photograph is from fire in Block 13, I think about 2 months ago now, which was very difficult at the time. So I want to just give you a bit of a picture. I know David's spoken about it a bit, Kath has spoken about it a bit, but I wanted to give you a bit of a picture of what it's actually like to live in Kakuma. First of all, it is the desert. It's land that nobody else wanted. It was actually being used by some Indigenous people, and they were somewhat brushed aside, and the area has been filled with one of the world's largest refugee camps. It's a very, very hostile and difficult place to live in. The conditions are absolutely extreme. Heat is extreme. It can be up to 40 degrees during the day. Cold drops down to desert levels, so it's not freezing, but usually, but it can get very cold at night. Food lacks, safety lacks. There is no accommodation. In 2019, one study said that only 5% of the people living in the refugee camp had electricity. So you can imagine that it's pretty intense. What they tend to live in, often little lean-tos. So it's a bit of corrugated iron with a bit of cloth hanging over it, something like that. If you're lucky, they have a mud brick house. Some of them do have little houses, but it would be probably still a minority. What do they eat? Well, they're given a bag of rice, or if they're unlucky, inedible maize, which is almost impossible to cook, so it's edible, particularly if they're not used to it, as well as $10 every month. So $10 buys a bit of food, but it's certainly not comfortable. And as well as that, they've got to pay for things like their phone and possible medical costs as well. Police will often not respond when attacks happen. So we had the other night, one of our trans friends was being attacked by a group of people, and she rang the police. They ignored her, and then about 20 or 30 of her friends online also rang the police, and so the police did actually go and persuade the people to go away. But often those sorts of incidents are completely ignored and leave people feeling very alone. So LGBT people are seen as evil devils, and people who are out to really destroy society and harm people. So they're often attacked and beaten. Many of our people also are Ugandan, and as a result, both their accent and their skin colour is different. So in other words, they look different and they sound different, and so they stand out, and so therefore they're attacked more often. The reason why they are Ugandan is because in Uganda it is illegal to be LGBT. So if you're LGBT, you may be thrown in jail if it's proven, and basically there you will stay for a very long time if you make it through, because in some jails you are beaten so much that you just don't last. So it's really tantamount to torture in many cases. It's not just going to jail, it is horrific. What also happens is that if you are exposed or they discover that you are LGBT in some way, what will happen is that a mob will form and they will try to stone you or kill you on the spot. So we have some people that have basically run for their lives with just their T-shirts on their back. And there are many cases where there's been one partner that's got away and the other partner hasn't got away. And of course, as we've mentioned, there are beatings, but also house burglaries, and sometimes the houses are actually set on fire, which is quite extraordinary. Next slide. Thanks. Very quick. Ethically, there's a constant sea of accusations. So what that means is that all the time they're accusing each other of fraud. So it's a very difficult situation to operate in because you just don't know who's telling you the truth. In most of the Western world, we don't tend to accuse each other of fraud or corruption, even when perhaps we should be considering it. Refugees themselves are often young, inexperienced, vulnerable, and easily led astray. So those extremes, as you can imagine, their naivety and their inexperience tend to breed desperation when there isn't enough food. Often there isn't too much to do during the day, all those sorts of things. So as a result, it also attracts scammers into that environment. So some scammers are attracted in, and they vary from being very naive and unsophisticated to being very sophisticated, very prepared. And the experience of most agencies, even if you're not working with refugees, is that you will lose money just because it's very difficult to be sure in the face of often very convincing fakes that what you think is happening is actually going on. And in fact, we ran into that ourselves. And in fact, we did expect it when we first started. We expected that we would have some fraud. But what happened in September, just a few months ago, was that we discovered that our main trusted team had built up a detailed scam operation, wasting a portion of the money we'd sent, quite a large portion. And obviously that really hurt. We felt betrayed. It took us quite some time to actually work out what had been going on in detail. We had to send someone in to take a look at it. But the process was very interesting. Despite the fact that it's been painful, some things have really opened up. So in terms of practicalities, most of the physical stuff we have had done has been done. So it's there. So if we built shelter, that was built and so on. But things like medical and food support had been siphoned off meaning that many people who actually needed medical help had not received that medical help, although it would have been available. So, as I said before, buildings are built, toilets are built, and fences were made, and those sorts of things. So there were some concrete improvements were there, but just not the medicine and food, which is also very important. So what do we miss? Attempts to steer us away from accountability. They were often sophisticated, but not always so. We did miss some of the less sophisticated ones because when there's a small step, you're used to somebody, you like them, you get on with them, and to give them the benefit of that. There were some occasions when we did that for very small things. There were some clever fakes. One of them was, for instance, professionally printed receipts. So they had hospital receipts that were professionally printed on receipt paper, looked very good and very official. Another thing was that they started off with real sick people at the start and gradually built up until it was so busy that we just couldn't pay attention to everything. So many people going through that it was difficult to work out what was happening. And they did. We believe that a lot of those people at the start were actually very real. One of the effects, though, was that it actually steered us away from working with other more skilled agencies, from connecting with them, from learning from them. And I think part of the problem there too is that, like anybody, if you're an agency working in that environment, your job isn't really to connect with other agencies. Your job is to do what you're there to do, which is to help people. And so often it's very difficult to work out how to actually connect with people. So some of the dangers in that situation, again, that we saw just from the whole experience, first of all, money can be very seductive to those who have nothing. It can make a big difference, but it can also really lead people astray. So one of the insights out of that was that it's very important to mentor and support people in appropriate ways. So that means, for instance, things like what is leadership? I mean, what is good leadership? Teaching people how to lead well, how to be kind, how to be appropriate, how to be firm, all those sorts of things. That they aren't things that they understand from their own background necessarily. Some do and some don't. But also supporting people financially so that they are not in a situation where they're giving money to other people and not getting any themselves. That's very important. But also just emotional support. You know, if the phone's ringing 24/7 and the person has no chance to sleep, how do they deal with that? How do we help them manage those sorts of pressures? It's also very common for donors to come in, help a little, and then to get discouraged and leave because of the fraud levels and the many other factors that make it difficult to work in a refugee situation. So many charities, as a result, do avoid working with both refugees and with LGBTIQ. And it's worth making a point there that obviously if you're working in a country where being LGBTIQ is illegal, it's very difficult to build an established charity to actually provide services in that area. The reason is that if it's illegal for people to be LGBTIQ, then what will happen is that as soon as you build the services, people will be put in jail, they'll be closed down, and then of course you have nothing left. So this might sound really strange, okay? It might sound really strange, and in a way it sounds strange to me, but it's funny. As a group, we actually have far more hope now that we had a grounding experience in this truth, and we definitely wouldn't have had that without this whole experience. Even the people who were in some way scamming us actually taught us a lot too, in very good ways as well as less than good. So both, and it's quite surprising the degree of breakthroughs, and you'll find as we talk a bit more, we've actually made some really good connections. So I'd like to hand over to Kath now to move on to the next section.
Thanks so much, Brian. Yeah, it's pretty sobering what you've been talking about, that's for sure. So we're talking about truth, justice, mercy, peace, and how they all are working together as a framework for us to consider the work we're doing in Kakuma, especially around this understanding that our funding was misappropriated. Not all of it, but some of it. So the next concept I want to speak about is that of justice, because at its core, justice is concerned about making things right. The role of justice is to shed light on a situation, to expose the paths of wrongdoing. The task is to make sure that something is done to repair the damage that's been wreaked, especially on the victims and on the downtrodden. Justice is about restoring relationships, but never while failing to acknowledge and rectify the thing that broke that relationship in the first place. At its core, justice is concerned about accountability. Often within a relationship, we can get caught up with thinking that anything and everything is acceptable, and yet truth and committed relationships have honest accountability, love built within this. Love without accountability is nothing but words, whereas love with accountability leads to changed behaviour and action. This then becomes a true meaning of reconciliation. The purpose of justice is to bring action and accountability to the empty words of ingenuine requests for forgiveness. I guess then the bottom line of justice in this situation is that we really do want those to whom we have spent vast amounts of money to be accountable for this money. This is not because of some desire to punish the wrongdoers. Absolutely not. Indeed, as I hope you're hearing throughout this whole presentation, we deeply do want to remain in relationship with our newfound friends. We want accountability of our funds because we want the money to be wisely used so that it can help more people. We want those who have misused our resources, though, to no longer have control of these resources. But justice is not just one way. The Board of Humanity in Need desire to be held accountable if there have been times when we have not trusted our LGBTQI sisters and brothers. Trust is a really big thing, and everyone needs to trust, and trust had been violated in this situation. I'm going to hand back to Brian, who's going to talk about the third of these concepts of LGBTIQ, that of peace. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, and I'll be right there. Excellent. Hi. So I want to talk to you a little bit about peace, which is another one of the LGBTIQ concepts that we're basing the talk on. So peace is an interesting thing, and of course there's always a thing that I guess you call cheap peace. And cheap peace is just when you pretend that everything's all right and you just ignore what's really going on. And that's not really what I want to talk about here. Unity is something that always makes it easier to work together. And of course, disharmony, obvious disharmony, is hard work, it's painful. It demotivates, and of course, one of the really big dangers is that it can lead to burnout. And of course, burnout is a ministry or charity-ending event in some cases if your main people burn out, because it takes time to build the main people, it takes time to educate them, it even just takes time to find them. So real unity is more than just a pretense. It takes work to get there, as Kath was saying before. It takes wisdom, it takes perseverance. It's not a cheap thing, but it's definitely worth the effort. So we do want to build bridges, and we want to teach others to build them too. So when we work with people in Kakuma and wherever we work with people, we want them to learn how to build bridges and how to connect with each other too. And often that's an issue in a refugee situation. Again, imagine working with extreme pressure on you. You don't get enough food, you don't get enough sleep, often you're cold, you might be tired, you might be unwell, you might be unsafe. It in time can take a big toll on you. All of those things can mount up a lot. And so their default position is not actually often working together. Their default position is actually often to compete. And so it's teaching the different groups, how do you work together? How do you make sure that you're not stealing from each other in terms of resources and people and all those sorts of things? How do you connect with each other? And that's one of the things that I think marks our mission going forward, without stealing too much thunder from the rest of the talk. So we love a peaceful outcome with our former leaders. We're very keen to work in excuse me, keen to work in partnership with other charities, many of whom, as David mentioned, have much more experience than we do and actually have specialised We've already made some great friends. Benefits of unity, of course, are crowdsourcing knowledge. Other people know more than you do. Working together with refugees and partners, nice to not be alone, and to use each other's resources. And finally, just comradeship. So you actually can enjoy some friendship in working together too, which of course makes it easier as well. So I'd like to hand back to Kath just to do a couple more of Lederach's points.
Thank you so much. So I bring in the fourth of mercy, truth, justice and peace, and that is to speak about mercy. Mercy is this place of wanting new beginnings. It's concerned with people and their relationships. Acceptance, compassion and support are all necessary components of offering mercy into a situation. Mercy is very much aware of the frailty of the human condition. It asks the core question, who among us is perfect? Mercy softens the harshness that truth and justice might bring. It reminds us that there is no life nor relationship if there is no mercy. So mercy at its core is about forgiveness and healing. And it is not hard to find mercy in this situation. We know that life is utterly awful for our Kakuma sisters and brothers, and we genuinely do want to help them. It is because of our merciful hearts that we began this work in the first place. And we continue this work because we genuinely do care about the LGBTQI community in Kakuma that are being persecuted for their sexual orientation. We come from a place of compassion, and as far as possible, we are not wanting anything back from our sisters and brothers. We do hope, for as much as it is possible, that our love is unconditional, that there is no ego trip in our work, just a deep desire to offer from our plenitude to those who have so little. I know for me, the guiding force in my involvement in humanity in need comes from my Christian stance, the stance that says to me, your love calls me to be more love. In that I am loved by the divine, so too do I offer love to others. So, truth, justice, mercy, peace come together, and when they do, hope is born. We move into the future because hope has enabled these four things to dance together. Now, hope is my thing. I've actually written a book on hope, Handbook of Hope. You see, hope is an action thing. We do hope rather than have hope. We are actively doing hope in our work in Kakuma. Hope is about maintaining a passion for the possible. We keep our eyes on what we desire to achieve, and then we do the steps that bring about achieving that. With our work in Kakuma, we truly believe that it is possible to provide better housing, a safe community where there is no persecution, where it's healthy and adequate food is available, and acceptance and love is there for our sisters and brothers. The passion we have for these things to become possible remains the motivation to be our hope as action. One thing to really know in this work is that hope and optimism are not the same thing. It is not wishful thinking that has made a difference in Kakuma. All the optimistic happiness in the world will not feed an empty belly if there is no food available. So rather than working from optimism, it is in the place where we are getting in, getting dirty, doing our best, whilst making mistakes, that hope is engendered. From a faith stance, hope is encapsulated in the theology that not only is the divine with us and for us, but that the divine mystery is also ahead of us. Wherever we're about to go, God has already gone ahead of us. As we continue to build relationships in Kakuma, as we move into the future with them, God is already present in that place, willing love, dreaming love, being love. You know, our very intention to be engaged in the process of reconciliation is based on hope. If we didn't have hope that the future could exist as a reconciled place, we wouldn't even begin this process of reconciliation. Despite our discovery of the misappropriation of funds, the Board of Humanity in Need, as Brian was saying, now actually feels stronger. We feel more committed, more energised, more focused. Yes, this experience has led to wounding, And it has also renewed in us a commitment to continue this work. Hope is probably best encapsulated in two small words: and yet. The situation in Kakuma is so dire, and yet there is always more. This is the stance of hope. Very much beautifully summed up in the words of the scientist Suzanne Moser, who says, "I've come to understand uncertainty as a necessary condition for hope. The future is going to look very different, and I can't tell you how, but we're going to have to get through this together and figure it out and create it. It's unsettling and it's difficult work, and we're bad at it, and that is the grounds for transformation. You cannot transform if you stay the same." And so I hand back to Brian. Thank you.
As we were preparing this week, we sat down and talked a bit about, what the experience had been and what had come out of it. Of course, you can imagine that obviously we've been preparing for this presentation for some 4 or 5 months now, and the presentation looked very different about 4 months ago. As we discovered that we'd actually been led astray by some of our people, we had to really rebuild things, and everybody said in a way that we've really come out better at the other side. But two of the things that I wanted to talk about, one is creating, that really seemed to me to be a key finding. One is creating good, strong local leaders is absolutely critical, and sometimes those emerge, but we found also that sometimes scammers emerge too. So it's important to work out, how do you create strong leaders? How do you lead them push them towards integrity when everything in their society often takes them in the other direction? Again, how do you train people? And I believe that we're very lucky because we've got a board where 3 or 4 of us have led of the 4 of us have actually led and managed businesses or charities previously. And so really it's just a matter of implementing that. The other thing is that's important, I think, is really working out how to have accountability and how to create that within a network that's actually supportive. And that's one of the processes, things that we're looking at right now, both in terms of how we deal with leaders. Everything in a desert location in the middle of a pandemic needs to be very simple. We have to be able to evolve to suit new situations. Technology can be useful, but nearly all of them have phones, even if they don't always have data for those phones. So talking a bit more about opportunities. So the opportunities that are opening up. Just lost my place. Excuse me for 1 second. All right, so we talked about mentoring and encouraging individuals, building communities. One of the things that we'd like to do is to help other donors. This is not just in terms of helping donors to give money to us, but it's also creating more of an environment for people where they actually know how to give money safely into that sort of environment. And for instance, we talked to one likely lad who we asked him, how much do you think it would cost us to feed somebody for a month? And the answer was $150 per person. Well, the real figure is $15 per person. So knowing that sort of thing can be immensely helpful, so that you don't give money when you could be helping 10 people. You're not helping just one, you're helping actually 10. We talked about paying people something when they actually work, helping others. Also having regular visits from a variety of people, management type people who are able to support and encourage in person, but people who are also able to look at what's going on and create an environment of, what could we say, supportive encouragement that people are doing the right thing and getting in the habit of doing that and actually getting a lot of pleasure out of that. One area we did fail. We failed to work with other agencies, and some of whom who are very skilled, and we're really keen on exploring that. And so, if someone's doing something very well, we don't want to repeat that. So, if they're building houses well, we don't want to repeat that work. We just want to use what they're doing and get behind them and help them in that area. One of the hardest things that we found too was finding the first person to trust. If you remember, there's a biblical story about building on sand or rock. And if I'm going to build a house, I do really want to build my house on rock or something solid rather than something that might shift around on me. And that first person can be very, very important. So we're going to move to panel now.
Yes, look, thanks very much, Brian. You've done a really good job. What we want to do at this stage is simply talk about the fact that when so many people of faith don't seem to care about these folk that we're talking to you about today, the Parliament of World Religions is a great place to find love in action, regardless of difference. You who are with us today or watching in your own time are a great encouragement to us. Whatever we do, we want it to be practical, accountable, and a shared experience of love. Now, Brian, would you like to host some questions? Just any questions that come out of this for us?
Sure, I would love to. I'm not sure if let's see whether we have any questions that have been posted to this point.
While Brian's doing that, one of our board members is not able to be with us today. And Jeff Alshorn actually is quite an example because of the point that Jeff is an atheist, but we refer to him as our atheist saint. He's been involved in this work for much longer than each of us. And he spends nights talking to people in Kakuma, talking to people in Uganda, talking to people in other places and just trying to give them encouragement and then try and find some finances to make a difference in their lives. Now, if only there were more people of faith doing that, what a difference we could make and change this narrative that condemns these people to such horrible lives. I'm just going to add one last point here. We really want to thank you very much for joining us. Kath, would you like to finish off for us?
Absolutely. I just would like to say as a final thing how so much of this work we're doing comes straight from the Hebrew scriptures of Micah 6, where it says, "He has told you, O mortal, what is good and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God." If we can stay with these three things, then we will continue to do this work with our Kakuma sisters and brothers. Thank you so much. Thank you.
If you would like to contact us, we have a slide up that gives you some information on how to do that. Our website is h-i-n.org, and that leads you to our Facebook page. The main website is not finished yet, but there's quite a lot of information on the Facebook page, as you'll see. Gives you an idea of some of the stuff that we've done. We'd love to hear from you. You've got questions. If you are interested in a journey of some sort, helping LGBTIQ people, helping refugees, feel free to send us questions. If you're curious about what we're doing and would like to find out a bit more and maybe do something with us, we'd love that too. But we're also very happy just to support you in your journey a bit to the extent that our resources permit.